gonna start. It's gonna say go live. There we are. Okay, comic book fans, Pete here, and I'm with my co-host from the Lassercast, Mr. Danny Torkel. Danny, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm exhausted. I got home at 2 in the morning from AEW Full Gear Wrestling Show live in New Jersey. Charlotte managed to stay awake through the whole thing. So I'm glad I watched the peripheral yesterday. Otherwise, I don't think I would have made it through it this morning.
Well, I want to point out too, that we're covering the peripheral. The peripheral has nothing to do with comics whatsoever. It's just that Danny and I had a lot of success covering Raised by Wolves on HBO Max, and so we're like, hey, let's cover the peripheral. So we are up to episode 6, and I could understand why you might have fallen asleep in this episode, Danny. I got to admit one thing too. I'm guessing you might feel the same way. But had I not been watching this show to review with you, I think that by this point I might consider like dropping it or like kind of watching other shows for a little while first, then maybe coming back to this when I didn't have anything
Yeah,
to watch. You know?
I last episode, episode 5, we
Yeah.
both said, especially me, because you had been a little bit more on the wagon with this show than I was.
Mm-hmm.
You were like, I think you're gonna really like episode 5, and it turned out that episode 5 is probably my favorite episode of the series so far. And coming out of that episode, I was really looking forward to like, all right, where is it finally gonna go from here? And then this episode, which has a great title, was it like "Fuck You and Eat Shit"?
I think it's Eat Shit and Fuck Off. I
Yeah,
believe.
uh, like it had a great title. I got like really into, and there's parts of this show that I really liked, but overall, it just feels like a lot of future speak and a lot of confusing. Like it just, I almost felt watching this episode that this should have been season 2.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
for season 1 of a complex science fiction show,
Yeah.
there's just too many characters with too many specific motivations that I'm like being tasked to remember. And that I don't really care about. Like last episode, they went right into the Alita stuff right at the beginning, like pre-credits, and I was like, "Yeah." This episode, not a drop, not even in the episode, she's barely mentioned, and it's just like there's so many characters. We're watching flashbacks of Burton's squad and Connor's squad, who I didn't even realize Connor is played by the actor who played Cassius Clay in One Night in Miami.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and
Very
he's so
cool.
good in that, and he's really good in this show. Like that's the
Yeah.
thing. It's like the acting in this show is really good.
Right. Right.
The special effects are pretty cool. The
Yeah.
ideas and the worlds that they're building are cool. I just think that there's so much more exciting ways to fill 55 to 60 minutes of time.
Yeah.
And they're picking very strange things to focus on and characters that I don't really care too much about.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. I wanted to also correct myself. You were right. The title is "Fuck You and Eat Shit," which that's going to be fun putting that in the YouTube title, right? But anyway, you're right. The acting is great. I have done a little bit of research because when I watch this show, I often get confused and I often think to myself, wait, is this important, this part here? And a lot of times I'll just go to Wikipedia, which is the easiest thing. I'll just look up a description of an episode. This show doesn't have that really. So I go and I look at reviews, and it's interesting because the reviews actually have negative stuff too. Like one guy in a review said that the action sequences on this show are kind of subpar, and I kind of agree with him with that scene that was in the butcher shop this episode, and then one other person in a review I read 2 weeks ago said that a lot of this show feels like it's just spinning its wheels, that you're just kind of like waiting to go somewhere, waiting to do something, and you're just kind of spinning your wheels. And I could actually agree with that quite a bit.
Yeah, it
Good.
feels like what? How many episodes is this season? 10?
I think it's 9. I'll just double check too. But yeah,
Because
go ahead.
you know what the best comparison I can make is you remember when the original Netflix Marvel shows came out?
Yes.
They were forced to do 13 episode seasons. And
Yeah.
even the best of those shows,
Yeah.
like the first season of
Daredevil.
Punisher, they only had 8 to 10
Yeah.
episodes worth of material. So
Right.
those episodes, the first few episodes of each show, the best one I can give you an example of is Luke Cage. The first
Right.
4 episodes of Luke Cage, I thought were some of the best stuff Marvel had done on Netflix at that point.
Yeah.
And then I just got bored and I
Yeah.
stopped watching it. And I
Yeah.
actually went back like months later to finish it. And those like episodes 5 through 9 were such a slog to get through before the last couple of good episodes. And I was just like, why are they forcing 13 hours of material when you can do, treat Netflix, should have treated those Marvel shows like they were serial killers and given them a 4-episode documentary series. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this show, The Peripheral, would work better 4 to 5 episodes, 40 minutes apiece. Just give us the meat and potatoes. And then all these extraneous characters in both the present, the past, and the future, throw them in episode 2 when we have our footing.
Yeah.
Like, again, I'll come back to a movie that we talked about in the very first review of this, the Matrix, right?
Yeah.
In the original Matrix, we meet Neo. Not a single other person in that opening 20 minutes is important except for Neo, Agent Smith, Morpheus, and Trinity. 4 characters. Then when he wakes up
Right.
after taking the pill, we literally do like a camera pan around the Nebuchadnezzar, and they're like, this is this character. This is this character. Say hi to the camera. Hi,
Yeah.
I'm Roach. I'm Flag. I don't know. I forgot the character.
Roach and Flag. Those are 2 of my favorite Matrix characters.
Stephen King is here now. But that's what this show needed. This show needed a hi everybody. Here's our names. Here's our characters. You should get to know us for 4 or 5 episodes, and then we'll introduce you to all these other crazy characters. Like maybe even spend the entire first season in 2032. And only hint at the idea that there's this future, like when we put the goggles on.
Yeah.
And don't bring in those future characters until later in the season or even the beginning of next season. It just feels like there's too much. I get into a story that I'm interested in, like that Irish serial killer. Really got into his story. He breaks the fish tank. He electrocutes the uncle's wife, and then we're back in the future with different characters, and it's like that storyline is just kind of done for now.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's jumping from like point A through to H, then back to C, then to K, and you're just like,
yeah. Very good point. I agree with you, and they're still continuing to introduce new characters too. I think the problem is, right, because the Matrix is an original idea unto itself, right? And you can't remember some of the classic names, man, like Mouse and APOC and
I said
Switch.
Roach. Roach was the character in People Under the Stairs.
Oh, okay.
But I was thinking, I remembered there was a small creature character.
Yes.
Mouse. There you go.
Yeah. Well, in this, though, they introduced new characters even by episode 6. And just to point out, too, there's 8 episodes. I just looked it up. There's 8 total. Okay. But in this episode, they introduced us to Detective Ainsley. Okay.
Now I love that character.
Okay.
I would like a spinoff of that character and her like assistant who calls her mom the whole time. Give me that show.
Yes.
Because she's such a fascinating character. It feels like she just stumbled into the show and like every word out of her mouth is like gold.
Yeah.
But it's like she's even interacting with characters that I'm not really interested in.
Yeah. It's clear that you and I are not really fans of the future timeline, except for maybe like Wilfred. There's Zebov, right? That's the guy who's from the sect. Lev Lebov or whatever. His fucking name's Lev, right? So him, and then he's got like that Asian woman that's got the Irish accent, and he's got his wife who we saw for like 1 episode. Like that's the part of the show where we're like, oh, okay, here we go again. And so, yes, she does meet them, and I think that a lot of this episode was that there's those three factions, right? There's like the police, which this Detective Ainsley is from. There's the sect, which is like this criminal organization. That's where Wilfred and Lev are. And then there is the Research Institute, and that's where Charisse is from.
And who are the Neoprims?
I know, I do. That's one of my notes I wrote down too. I'm like, what the fuck is a Neoprim? I know. But
Yeah.
this is the thing, is that like I started reading this book, the William Gibson book, and I kind of couldn't just get into it right away. I mean, maybe I'm, not as complex as I'd like to think, but I just couldn't get in because it was very dense, right? And it automatically goes right to the time of Wilfred, like right away. I like your idea of like maybe focusing in the 2038 timeline, and then maybe going to the future timeline in the second season. That's a great idea. And just make it that every time that Flynn goes in, she's like into this weird world and she's learning things, but we're not seeing the other side of that world. I like that idea a lot. But I think that's just the way that the book is written, where it does show both timelines. And I think it's kind of confusing. What I noticed about William Gibson, at least from the very little I read, was it doesn't seem like there's a lot of like exposition dumps where someone just like explains something to you. It just kind of seems like you have to put it all together. So it's.
I also feel like this show is also struggling for me, not for any of its own faults, just because of when we started watching it. Like, we started watching this at almost the same time that we started watching Interview with a Vampire. That was easily my favorite show of the year.
Oh, yeah.
I'm more of a horror fan. You're more of a sci-fi fan. Right. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
But I love science fiction.
Right.
But like, I had Interview with a Vampire and all of the, bloody, sexy vampire goodness in New Orleans. I'm also watching Chucky, which has just been like the craziest episodes. Like, you wouldn't believe the shit that happens on that show. And it's also, like, we're also trying to watch a ton of movies. It's the combination of like Oscar movies are starting to come out for the Oscar push, plus horror movies are just, there's more and more of them coming out. Black Panther came out. There's so much stuff to watch, and I feel like I'm watching this show, and because it's fine, but because it's not grabbing me in the way that I want it to, it just kind of ends up becoming background noise.
Yes, totally understand. Yes.
Which is disappointing.
Yeah. Like, I can tell you specific scenes where it's background noise. It's specific scenes like when they're in that butcher shop and they're talking to the people about the peripherals and having them made for Alita. That's kind of background noise. It's when Ainsley finally meets with Lev and stuff and they're talking to him and like all that stuff. That's background noise. The stuff that stands out that's really interesting is when Wilfred and Flynn, who's in her peripheral, are walking through London, and she asks the question of, look at all these people, like, how come they never really interact with us or come close to us? And then he reveals that those people are just part of a simulation that they have in their implants in their heads. And so they're not even there. Like, essentially, they're like wallpaper to make you feel like you're living in a real world. And then
they take the wallpaper off of the actual world itself, and you see that it's still suffering from the jackpot. And like, it really makes you think, like, what is this future even? There's so few people left, and the architecture is so destroyed and underdeveloped that, like, who cares about making it to this future?
Right.
So it's really, and that goes back to the episode last week where Alita says to her ex-girlfriend, if you're doing this, what was it, the God font? She's like, if you're doing this now, like, or if this is what's going to happen in the future, how much have you already done now?
Yeah.
And it really makes you wonder, like, this is what I mean. There's great ideas in the show. Like, how much of what we are actually looking at is real?
Right.
I just watched. Did you watch Vengeance? BJ Novak's movie?
Not yet.
That's another one. It's streaming free on Peacock, but he goes on like a tirade in that movie about how like everything is nobody lives in the moment anymore. And he's like, people don't even talk in the moment anymore. We text. And so, like, I say hi to you at 10 o'clock at night. You get back to me in the morning. And then we make a plan for the next day. And it's like, we. We're not having an actual conversation person to person like now we are, but
Yeah.
he's like, even like the way we communicate, the way we date, the way we listen to music, we don't buy albums and listen to albums. We just pick and choose what songs, and then an AI picks songs that they think we'll like based on this one song that we like. And
Yes.
it's really like, how like streaming apps curate lists of movies for us. We don't go
Yes.
out to the movies. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in there that I feel like this show kind of is getting to with the
Yeah.
God font and this idea of what is real, and what AI is allowing us to see and what the technology is allowing us to see. And it, it's just I wish that there was more action, not like shoot 'em up action, but just more action. It feels like the characters in this show travel to places to have long conversations.
Oh my god, it's like the Star Wars prequels, you
Yeah.
know? You just yeah. But you know what? It's like, speaking of the great ideas, at the very end of this episode, Detective Ainsley is talking to Lev and his people, and she's asking about these stubs. And the stubs are essentially like timelines that they've created that are branched out from their main timeline. And it's because they're changing the past. And I know that the Research Institute is doing that as well. A good example is, we saw how the Research Institute directly affected Connor,
Yeah.
because we see the flashback they showed in the previous episode. In the previous episode, they show a bunch of soldiers with this dog and it blows up. We see that in first person this time around, and Connor is the one that rescues the dog. And it's this very disturbing scene. We see this dog trapped in barbed wire. Now we know how Connor gets hurt, and we know that it's because of the influence of the Research Institute. So at the very end of this episode, Detective Ainsley is talking to them, and they're sort of discussing the ethics of affecting the past, because it doesn't affect their timeline, but it affects all these different timelines. And at one point, the Asian Irish woman, I heard she's got like some kind of badass name too. It's like Hawk or something. Anyway, she says that giving him the term stubs kind of gives it like a third world quality, and it makes it seem okay that you're messing with actual human lives.
Yeah.
And that's a real deep kind of thing. I like that idea. um it's just it's like we're not there yet, like, we literally see an example of Connor's life being fucked up, and there's actually even more gruesome scene in this episode where Connor is able to show his experience to one of his friends, and you
Mhm.
see like what he experienced after he was blown up, and
Yeah.
that looks like straight up out of a horror movie too.
Yeah, I like all the stuff with Connor. I think
Yeah.
like I like the idea of him wanting to live in the future, because at least he's like, who cares if I'm in a coma for months at a time? I was doing that already.
Right.
He's like, but at least my mind will have three of my limbs back, and I'll be a fully functioning person again. And I love that like inner conflict. It's just like this was episode 6. Like, I don't see how in 2 episodes they're going to get to any type of conclusion that I'm going to think is, oh man, okay, that's a good conclusion for this season. I just
Yeah.
feel like they're going to build and build and build, and they're going to set something up for season 2. And has season 2 been greenlit yet? This is on Prime, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's not like Netflix. I think they usually do make second seasons of shows. I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah.
But yeah. Um,
I did want to point out though, the Irish serial killer,
Bob.
Bob, I stared at him all last week going, I know this guy. I hate him. Where do I hate him from?
Oh
And
no.
he is the actor. He was on Outlander, and he like violently rapes the lead character in like episode in season 5. Claire,
Yeah.
she in the past, in like the 1700s in South Carolina or wherever they're living,
Yeah.
She like saves him. Like he has like a medical thing, but he also finds out that like he's like raping his wife to try to have a baby, and he finds out that Claire is giving his wife the 18th century version of like uh like Plan B to like
Oh,
keep her from getting pregnant, and he like him and like his group like violently rape her, and it's like this
Jesus.
awful. And if there's one thing about Outlander is they are very big on the R word. That's like
Yeah.
a pivotal plot point in most episodes. Like much to
Jesus.
my chagrin, I always like joke with Athena. I'm like, again, like why do we have to keep watching this? Uh,
Jesus Christ. I didn't
uh,
know that about that show. That's
oh yeah,
horrible.
there's a lot of that. But there's a lot of consensual and non-consensual sex in Outlander.
Right.
But yeah, so he is really good at playing like a detestable villain. He's very good at it. That actor, his
Yeah.
name's Ned something, I forgot, but he played like he was a member of the Brown family in Outlander.
Yeah. Ned Flanders. But like I was gonna say was that just to kind of just tie things up and then kind of wrap this up because we actually have to go record another show for our other channel. Is that the reason why the episode is called like "fuck you and eat shit" is because the guy whose last name is Constantine, who's the sheriff that Flynn likes, he was in a car accident when this man took Bob away. Like he was able to rescue Bob from being arrested. And we find out in this episode that the man that rescued Bob using the invisible car is actually like the sheriff working at the same
Yeah,
department as Constantine.
and that's his like computer password, right?
Right. And so that they're able to hear his recordings of Bob talking to him in his car. But it just shows that like the Research Institute is influencing a lot of people because obviously they've paid off Constantine's supervisor, right? So
Yeah.
the past is getting just totally manipulated. And I actually do like the stuff with Constantine in the past, like this guy that is just looking out for Flynn. That part kind of reminds me of like True Blood. I think you kind of
Sorry.
connected this to True Blood before, where it's
Yeah,
like this small town kind of thing, and you have all these kind of
yeah.
redneck people, but
If
it's like a
Flynn becomes Sookie, I'm done.
there you go.
Yeah,
But
I was a fan of True Blood until. Did you watch it? Did you watch the whole series?
I watched up to season 4, then I
Okay.
stopped.
Yeah,
Maybe season 5.
the exact moment where I looked at Athena and went, "I'm done," was when it was the season premiere of either seasons 4 or 5, and Sookie turns to Eric at one point of the first episode and goes, "Eric, you killed my fairy godmother,"
Oh
and
yeah.
I literally went, "Yep, done. Enjoy.
Ah.
I'm out." And I didn't watch. And like, basically like every season was just like, all right, who's the next like 6'7" underwear model that's gonna hook up with Sookie? And it was a vampire, there was a werewolf, there was shapeshifters. Like I had enough at one point.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of a bad sign when we're talking about other shows more than we're talking about the main show here.
Yeah,
Obviously, Danny and I are kind of losing interest in the Peripheral. There are 2 episodes left because we know that
we'll finish it up.
yeah, because we know that you guys watch the show and we've got more views because of it. We're definitely here for the last 2 episodes.
And
But
if you like the show, like, I'm not saying you don't have to mansplain it to us, but tell us what you guys like about it, and maybe it'll open up our eyes to something that we're just not seeing, because this feels. I want it to be more like the Matrix, but unfortunately, it feels like Matrix sequels.
oh, dang. Okay, well, that's a good note to end it on. We will be back next week, but like Danny said, please tell us in the comments if you do like the show. And if you haven't liked, subscribe to Comic Books Transformed, hop on board. We'll be here next week. Thanks so much, guys. See ya. All right.